Welcome to everybody to Rethinking the Student Experience, how higher ed leaders are deepening engagement in novel ways. You know, it's really interesting. I was at, my first ASU+GSV was in 2012 when we were still at Sky Song. I don't know if anybody remembers those days when we only had a couple hundred people rather than a couple thousand. But I remember at that time that the term student success was really kind of taking off, particularly in higher education, and how to define student success around retention and graduation, and of course post-graduation success as well. And it seems really in the last couple of years, and particularly in the midst of the pandemic, that the term student experience, really largely borrowing from the term the customer experience in the business world, has really come much more into force in education, and particularly higher education. And what was interesting to me is I did a paper on the student experience last year, which I'm more than happy to share with any of you, and you can find on my website. But one of the things I found is that in higher education, this term is still pretty new, because in higher ed, we're just much more siloed than in many other industries. And you know, forget about the idea of talking about the student as the customer, but it's more about that student experience moves from many different offices over the student life cycle on campuses, and many of them don't talk to each other about this experience. They may not agree on what that experience should be, and even at the end of the day, there's no one person that's usually largely responsible for it. And so we're going to be talking today a little bit about what the student experience means, how to improve it, how to reduce the friction for students, the role of AI in doing that, the role of other technology tools in doing that, and then we'll also leave plenty of time for questions. So I'm really excited about the group that we have up here today. In your app, you could look at their bios, because we're going to dive right into this question about the student experience, because I think it really is a relatively new term. So I just want to go around to the whole group and have you each define what it means to you, and then why is it critical for college leaders and institutions to be focused on this right now. And we will start right here. Talin?
Sure. The way I look at student experience, it's really about all the interactions students have throughout the life cycle, throughout their journey, with an institution, but also with the environment. So also it includes the social interactions. And the reason why I think it is really important is the better experience students have, I think it drives engagement. It drives them to be more psychologically invested, put in more effort, and have better outcomes. And it also drives them to make decisions that are beneficial for the institution. If a student or a prospective student has a great experience with their first conversation, they're more likely to enroll. They're more likely to stay with the institution. They're more likely to refer the institution. They're more likely to come back for continuing education.
Talin, thank you. Raj?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. To me, when I think about defining the student experience, it is about shaping the culture and the shared narrative and devising specific individualized action to deliver sustained value for a student. And like Talin said, for us, it is about continued engagement of the student in their workplace. For us, it is about both academic and non-academic. A lot of times we focus on the non-academic when it comes to student experiences, but we don't realize that our faculty members who deals with them day in and day out, like you said, from an interaction point of view, are primary determinants of student experiences. It is also about accommodating student differences, if you will, in terms of the sustained value. As a head of a technology school, we are about job readiness and either employment or graduate school options, if you will. Why is it important? To me, what I am finding out, Jeff, is that it is a dynamic measure, but it is a leading indicator of potential success for the organization. Students may be successful, they may get great jobs, etc. But if they don't enjoy their experiences in college, it doesn't come back, in terms of lifelong learning or alumni funding or philanthropic dollars and so on. So you can actually, win the war and lose the battle, if you will, or the other way around. So that's why, to me, student experiences are extraordinarily important now.
Sarah?
So what I like to think about is, why do we educate? We educate because of potential. We educate about helping our learners reach their potential and making sure that we are supporting them as much as we can with allowing them pathways into curiosity, allowing them pathways where they can develop that potential. So when I think about experience, what I am very excited about is thinking about how we break down the walls of how we have designed experience and move into our own potential as educators into, we don't need the institution in the way we needed it before. We can engage with the learners in ways that they actually will develop that potential. So I know we're going to talk a lot about that as we go through this conversation, but for me, it's all about potential.
I like that potential. Tom?
Yeah, going last is always a,
Challenge.
Yeah,
You could just say +1 to all of them, right?
But I do agree with everything that my colleagues said here. I'll add a couple of things that were kind of talked around. One is that our students' expectations are changing, and it's shaped by the world that they have experienced growing up, which is one that's much more designed around them, convenient for them, and personalized around them. And when we kind of try to bring in, the term of student experience, I've moved away from it because there's such a reticent reaction to it. So I use the student journey, seems to get less reticence when I mention it that way. And that, it starts from a standpoint of when they're even thinking about joining us and all the way through graduation and potentially maintaining them, relationship with them as a lifelong learner. How do we now capture all of these digital interactions that we can see as a data stream, not thinking about our silos, but thinking about a longitudinal set of interactions we have with the individual, and then understanding how we can make the individual better through expertise and capabilities that we bring to them. So it's a real opportunity here to bring thinking from other industries to help us kind of think through how we meet the expectations that students and families and regulators and government officials have of us today.
So Tom and Raj, I'm going to start with you because I want to talk about how this plays out on your campuses, for example. So a couple of months ago, I interviewed a student for my newsletter who was at a big public university and had done an internship last summer and needed to get credit for it because it didn't show up. And so he started at the registrar's office. The registrar's office sent him to the financial aid office because he was receiving financial aid. Financial aid office sent him to the career center office. Career center office sent him to his academic advisor. The academic advisor sent him to his dean's office. Each time he had to tell the story over and over again, had to find time to go to these offices and so forth. I mean, incredible amount of friction. And as I asked this student, I said, if you had that friction in the real world, if you were trying to return a product to Target, or as any of us call customer service, and as I do, press 0 constantly to try to get to a human being, right? You just get frustrated and you just walk away. And this student persevered, but we know many students might not. So can you talk a little bit, and Tom, let's start with you, since I let you go last time. How have you tried on your own campus to reduce that friction? Any examples? And more so, how can higher ed get out of these silos so that we don't see every service on the student side, every academic department, everything on campus as these silos? Because students don't see them that way, and this journey, as you talk about it, has then a lot of bumps and perhaps detours and off-ramps the more we think about it in those silos.
Yeah, so a couple of things come to mind, right? Because this is the way that we've organized, and I have ended up, right, because people look at my title like, oh, you're the technology person, or you're the data dude, right? I'm like, no, I'm the vice chancellor, and I have this kind of unique picture of seeing across the silos, being responsible for none of them, but the ability to weave them all together, right? So I uniquely can use the word like journey and turn it into a horizontal conversation. So I try to use that to bring it back to, none of us will argue that we're trying to help our students succeed, right? So let's talk about the journey as a way of getting at the silos. my role ends up being a lot more about moving, from talking about data or technology to process, to organization, to strategy, to culture, which Raj mentioned. Because ultimately it comes down to is that culture permeates the way we think. And even when we say we believe in student experience and being student-centered, what they really mean is within their silo, never across the whole journey. So I've had to kind of put my hand up metaphorically and say, I own this conversation across all of us, and that's both a good thing and a challenging thing every day.
And Raj, how about at Illinois? What have you been able to do at the Illinois Institute of Technology in terms of trying to reduce this friction? Because it's not easy, right? You have to work across multiple disciplines, multiple departments. People have been doing this for a long time. Even the corporate world hasn't quite figured this out, but there's a lot more command and control in the corporate world than there is in higher ed, where everybody thinks they own this area, whatever that area might be.
Right. So to me, when I think about this, like Tom mentioned, there is a technology piece, there is a data piece, but the human piece is actually the most important piece when it comes to this. And so let me, give you an academic example of what this friction means. So we had been collecting data for 10 years on student education, their frictions, their pain points, everything that they, when they interact with us is actually tabulated and so on. We also have, obviously, their experiential learning experiences and employment. And there were 3 or 4 things we found. One, students with a faculty mentor do better long term, however you define it. Second, students were themselves taking industry credentials to map alongside their education. And those students did far better in terms of getting a job 6 months before graduation and so on. And as importantly, we found students who were part of student organizations to do better, And again, there are multiple metrics we use to track. And what we did 2 years ago, based on this 10 years of worth of data, is we devised a platform called Elevate, which fundamentally says we are going to mandate certain experiential learning opportunities for you. We are going to give you a peer mentor on day 1, a faculty mentor, and a professional counselor. And we are going to guarantee job readiness. My legal counsel came and said, I initially wanted to guarantee jobs. And my legal counsel said, don't do that. Job readiness is what you want to guarantee. So anyway, but the long story of this, Jeff, is the fact that we utilized what was out there, but we also put it in a structure. It's a combination of the formal and informal, and I'll be more than happy to talk about it, because at the end of the day, what we found out is if there is one person who's not empowered to ensure seamless student experiences, and that person is not accountable, this doesn't work. However, having said this, this has to be connected with the informal networks and so on. So this is a classic example in our case where we found utilizing the data, utilizing the technology, but also the human-centeredness, if you will, actually leads to productive outcomes for all of us.
You mentioned utilizing technology, and Talin, I want to bring you into this conversation, because what was interesting about that example I gave of that student at that big public flagship is that each of those encounters were with people. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget a vice chancellor at the University of California system 20 years ago telling me, we have never tried to figure out a solution on this campus that didn't involve people, right? So tell us a little bit about, obviously we've been talking a lot about AI over the last couple of days. So how might we utilize AI, whether that's virtual teaching assistants, personalized learning, self-monitoring, how can we help improve the student experience using AI?
A lot of ways. We started utilizing AI 6 years ago, and when I look at today and all the buzz around recently, it's amazing what's possible. I can't think of any step throughout the student life cycle where you can't utilize AI. It's really from the recruiting, prospecting for students and understanding what the fit is and reaching out and communicating to avoiding summer melt to having just-in-time student interventions, to career resume writing and instant feedback, finding the right job for the right skill set. I mean, just all across, AI can help. I think what's important to understand and to think about is there are different use cases that it's better to use AI and technology, and there are use cases it's better to use humans. So I wouldn't look at it as a replacement, but together, you are offering a better experience. So an example would be, we, for example, have a chatbot, and it unites the departments. So as a student, you can go and you can ask any question, regardless of which department, and you get your responses. And there are going to be times that are more advisory services that require a human connection, that are just not a one-line response in a chatbot or whatever it is. And then it's important to make it seamless to transition to the right human. So it's a seamless experience for students. So I think it's really important to look at the use cases, be very thoughtful about privacy, accuracy, and what AI does, because there's a wide range, and really inform yourself.
I want to come back to that in a second around the people versus about the AI. But Sarah, we mentioned before, it was Raja mentioned, the student experience is not just about what happens outside the classroom, but the classroom experience is key to it because, students are spending most of their time involved in classroom activities. So how can we make then the learning environment as part of that student experience more active and more engaging?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and just building on what all these incredible experts are saying. So we have, at the intersection of technology, pedagogical sciences, what a lot of us don't realize is that the pedagogical science space is also coming into a heyday. And what we know here is that we've got this area where we can tap into and really bring to life for our learners. So one area we all know that we need to be doing more of is providing opportunities to practice. We need to also move beyond this notion. And the reason we want to offer these opportunities for practice is things like the forgetting curve, right? So the whole reason that we do lecture-based delivery of information is because it's very efficient. This is why it is a format and a way that we've been doing how we educate for thousands and thousands of years, right? But the problem is, with that, is within 24 hours, 80% of that information delivered in the lecture is gone, unless you give the opportunity to those learners to practice. The other thing that we've been all limited by from an educational standpoint is this idea of how we have created our institutions that have really serviced, the industrial era. And we've been kind of locked into this sort of 4-year, 2-year degree mentality where that person who's graduating is going to have that career for their whole life. And that is not the world we're living in, and we haven't lived in that world for a long, long time. We are all in this world where we need to be thinking about how we're upskilling and reskilling continuously and reinventing ourselves and shedding and building on the skills we had, a decade ago and how we move into the future. And one of the best ways to do that is by having lots of opportunities to practice as you're going through this educational experience. So the one example I like to use is when you look at the Green Revolution, massive amounts of new ways of delivering calories to human beings, and a lot of us became pretty fat because we weren't very good at saying this is good calories versus this is bad calories. And I think what we need to think about is how we build more learner centricity, where we understand what's the good calorie versus the empty calorie in education, right? And how do we start to really assess and design learning that is actually tapping into the pedagogical sciences and going beyond that, that 4-year or 2-year in the case of an MBA education. It's something we're doing at IMD a lot. We're thinking about those nudging journeys. We're thinking about AI. We're starting to build our AI engine room and our capability that combines gaming, combines all these capabilities, but also supports that individual who has natural baked-in curiosity and how we kind of unlock that potential with this new way of how we think about designing our curriculum.
So I love this analogy, right, with the Green Revolution. But let's talk a little bit about efficacy and kind of tracking success on this front. because with student success, we've been able to move the needle on retention and graduation rates pre-COVID at least for a little bit. So we were able to kind of say, okay, our efforts are working, and we looked at subpopulations and some campuses and say our efforts are working. This is a little bit more difficult, maybe, because how do we measure at the end of the day that the student journey is better? Like what ways can we measure that? And let me keep with you and Sarah and Talin on this. Go ahead, Sarah. How might we measure this?
Yeah, well, I think this is where we've been. So first of all, we've made that measurement very much a survey or an assessment with an exam that isn't necessarily, are we testing this learner's ability to learn? Are we testing their cognitive skills? Are we testing their creativity? These are all really different, they're pretty hard things to assess. So I think we need to go beyond satisfaction. We need to go beyond, and we need to be thinking about, impact beyond how we're doing the old way of assessing. Multiple choice tests need to be blown up. They shouldn't exist. These are not the ways that we should be assessing how actual human beings think and know.
Talin?
When I think of the student experience with the previous definition of it's about every interaction, I do believe that it's important to understand after every interaction, did we meet their needs or not?
And how would you find that out?
So, pulse surveys. If we talk about, for example, our technology, there's a quick feedback functionality. Did we meet your needs? Were we able to answer what you were looking for? So I think some of the pulse surveys, and then I think beyond that, I think there is a little bit of a correlation of student experience drives engagement. So I would start looking at what are student-led initiatives? What is their engagement in different areas? Do they show up for certain things? I think that would be the other area I would dig into.
Jeff, can I add to,
Go ahead.
Can I add to this, which is, I think much like many things we've done in higher education, we've built the mechanism measuring success around what we think it is and what's easy for us to measure. We live in an empowerment-based world now, right? And one of our mottos is, understanding each unique student in their journey, right? I think we need to let students, their families, certainly we get a lot of feedback from people who set our budgets in our state capitals about whether we're doing the right thing or not, from employers about whether they think the students that we're sending to them are ready. I think it needs to be a lot more defined by the external stakeholder and what they define as success. I mean, one of the things right now that I have 2 experiments going on, so experiments are like pre-prototype, is someone deliver the first generation of what's a Fitbit for education, for the learner, Fitbit for the learner. I think that's going to be a powerful thing when someone rolls out something that's kind of catchy and catches on with people, because what it means is I get to define my goals. And then as institutions, I think we need to really think about how do we feed information to the learner, to the individual, that helps them track where are they against their goals, and then use nudging technologies to say, this will get you a little bit higher GPA, right? Or this experience can really position you for that entry-level job that you're shooting for.
But that's a big culture change. I'm just thinking of this piece that was in the Chronicle a couple of days ago about kind of the culture shift in classrooms. We've always had this very faculty-centric model. The stage on the stage has left us even maybe 20 years ago, but still the faculty were in control of a lot of things, including kind of assessment and trying to figure out how not only are students learning, but is the overall experience good. How do you change that culture though, that this idea that, college is measured by, job placement kind of riles some faculty members, as you know, right? That they don't think that's their job necessarily. So how do you kind of help this culture change move forward, especially with faculty who are so central to governance on campus?
Slowly.
Okay.
I also, a couple of quick pointers. One, it is never a one-size-fits-all. When we think about a learner or a student who is in our system, there is a pre-enrollment till they matriculate journey, and then there is a post-enrollment journey. And even when you think about the various categories of learners, you have the first-time student, you have a transfer student, you have a non-degree student, you have a study abroad student who comes for a semester. So different, when you think about this grid, it becomes extraordinarily complicated. So one of the things that I would urge people to look at, and we are embarked on an exercise here, is to start thinking about various journeys of these students, if you will. But while the holy grail is personalization, personalizing for all these segments, individuals, students, et cetera, can be daunting. So you need to have a measure of standardization as well. But going back to your question about faculty, one of the things that I'm in a private school, and we absolutely say it is fundamentally about job readiness, which a lot of universities cannot do. We talk about employment and so on. One of the things we have started doing over the last couple of years is factually telling people what is happening out there in the world in terms of the demand, the enrollment cliff, and what are the other issues that are happening. So faculty feel that retention is an important metric, graduation rate is an important metric, and so on. And the second thing we have started doing is to go back to faculty, and when I was in school, people would say, well, look to your left, look to your right, only one of you will graduate and all that stuff. That kind of a language we don't permit. We basically say, if there is an elevated level of failures in your classes.
In fact, it will get faculty fired these days, as we know at NYU with that big case last year.
If there is, I don't know about firing, and especially since I'm getting recorded here, but but on a serious note, I think there is a lot of introspection, right? When you have multiple people, can you start thinking about flipped classrooms that Sarah was talking about? Can you start thinking about other options to keep us ready and so on? So that's the way we are thinking about the future. But as Tom said, it is perhaps slow progress, but engaging the faculty, telling them they are cultural ambassadors in this journey, and without their involvement, success is not going to happen soon, is fairly critical. And you tie it back to their own futures, if you will, because we need students who are going out and who have great experiences in our school, who are very successful, and obviously we want that virtuous loop.
Sarah, you had something, and then I had a question for Talin.
Yeah, and I just want to maybe challenge this idea of this linear progression and think more cyclically. So when you think about a learning loop, right, so this is where you've got expertise coming from the faculty, you've got that opportunity to practice, and then you've got feedback, and there has to be that feedback loop, and can we make that feedback loop shorter and smaller so that that learner, if they are having difficulty, they have more opportunities to practice and hear and understand, and then move on to the next level. We know that learning takes that step progression. You can't have somebody come in at the 45th floor and say, okay, now you're gonna, tell us about astrophysics if you haven't done all of the steps before that, right? And so you still have to have that natural progression. That's how we, the human organic form, that's how our brains, work. But could we do more of these micro loops and have that, the atomic ability to have practice embedded within there? And I know I keep banging on about the practice, but the serious gamer in me is gonna keep coming back to that.
So, Talin, I want to ask about the upshot of AI on campuses, because it was interesting. A couple of months ago, a VP for enrollment at a university called me, asking me for my thoughts on some of the pre-enrollment chatbots and stuff like that. And he said, he said it's been really tough here post-pandemic and in trying to get staff, but he said, but I don't want to get rid of staff, right? I don't want AI to replace staff. Because it's not our culture. And it really struck me as he was making a choice between investing in people or investing in AI. And if we invest in AI but don't lose the expense of the people, then we haven't, in my opinion, changed the cost curve at all in higher ed, right? So what's the upshot here? Because a lot of, for example, in the white paper that I did last year that I referenced, a lot of the technology savings were just in terms of people's time. So what they would end up doing is using those people on other projects, but they didn't necessarily reduce headcount in any way. And again, so I'm starting to think about what is the upshot? What is the upshot of using AI, if not to bend the cost curve?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I have similar experiences with our clients. I definitely see a reluctance of replacing people with AI. I see a lot more often when it comes to student services and student support and questions. I see the AI play a role in answering questions off hours. So 40% of questions asked in our network are outside of 9 to 5. And so it's typically people wouldn't be staffed. A lot of times I hear from institutions, or I haven't heard a lot, oh, we're overstaffed. You know, so the starting point is being understaffed. But then you have other use cases where AI helps you to enroll more students. And they need to be served as well. So there's more work to do with students that come in. I think what's critical is maybe not necessarily looking at how do I replace and save the cost, but how do we also reskill and look at the success of staff differently, so they can add value in different ways and drive more enrollment and more student engagement and more graduations and hit other student outcomes and goals for the institution.
Great. We have about a little over 8 minutes left, so I have a couple more questions, but I want to make sure that we get to any audience questions that we may have during this time. But go ahead, Tom.
I wanted to build on Talin's comment, right? Because I said I absolutely agree. I'm taking my organization through this conversation about, we're talking about people and or technology. We need to take, first of all, or out of the equation, and we need to focus on the work. It's amazing how let's say the organizational, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's kind of immaturity about, we need to focus on the work. You know, what are the steps associated with the work? Can we put a volume of the work on it? Can we tell people how well we do it today? When we deployed our first set of chatbots, what worked the best was we figured out our volume of work. We figured out that 70% of them were repetitive questions that were easily answered, didn't need to take up a person's time, and that's where we started. And then we went from 70 to 80%, and now we've topped out at about 92% and won't get any higher. And then we started to say, we've worked out a process here. Where's the next place we can go drop in this? Start with evaluating the work. I think we miss on it. We run to, it's a people versus technology issue versus let's evaluate the work.
Yeah. So I want to see if there's any questions from the audience before I ask any of my others. Anybody? Okay, I guess we're answering all the questions. Oh, yes, let's take one over here. Right, so the combination of like a mastery-based or a competency-based learning model that complements the student experience. Anybody want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is where we're all getting so excited about AI, rightfully so. I think it's amazing, and I think there is so much potential, and I think there's potential in the democratization of the areas where we may not have in our institutions, like the game building and things like that, and technology, code writing. I think that, yes, to answer your question simply, the answer is yes. You know, this is an opportunity for us to reimagine what a degree looks like. When we think about, and you know, I'm very much in that sort of mid-level career to executive education. We have a lot of folks that we're taking care of in that space. What does it mean to address skills gaps within an organization? You know, this is about providing a place, an opportunity to rethink how they bring that skills and capability building, just the same way we would be doing with our undergrads and our graduates. So absolutely, and this is again where I think technology is going to be a great help. And I think we need to widen our scope and not just be about AI only. This is where all of the Web3 technologies are really going to help with that reimagining of a college degree.
Yeah, we'll take this one quick question, then it plays into my last question anyway. Go ahead.
Well, thank you for the discussion. And we're talking about upskilling on an ongoing basis for learners from
Microphone right.
Sorry, this is Michael Fong from Tec de Monterrey in Mexico. So my question to you is, what are we doing to understand the motivations of a much wider segment of learners so that we are delivering the student experience to where they're at? Not just traditional students, but if they keep coming back into your system, do we really understand what they're looking for, and how do we address that?
Great question. In fact, we shouldn't call it the student experience, we should call it the learner experience. Yep. Anybody want to take that?
I would love to, but it...
Go ahead. Anyway?
Go ahead and start.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, no, after you.
No, we have a lot of work to do in that regard, right? I mean, everything is today built around this kind of very bundled, Sarah mentioned it, 2-year and 4-year experience, right? We really...
And usually around a certain point in life.
Yeah, a certain point in life, right? And so, we have 40, in this country, we have 40 million people who started higher education and didn't finish, right? That is I mean, if this was a healthcare example, we'd call it an epidemic, right? I mean, these are people who have limited their opportunities because the system has not worked for them. And that's on the system, it's not on the individual. I think we have a lot of figuring out how to unbundle this, and I actually think the disruptors are going to figure out a better way to push the incumbents on this. Because I think the incumbents, we have too many built-in things I think are holding us back. I fight in the conversations, and it's just, we're comfortable where we're at, and that's the definition of being an incumbent. I think we need to be disrupted in this regard, and then the incumbents will start to move. But that's just a personal opinion, and I hope this doesn't come back to haunt me.
I will add to that, the conversations we have from a technology perspective is how do we understand that persona better and what their needs are? And we constantly think about how do we personalize their experience to come back and partner with institutions who are innovative around non-degree programs or continued education. How do we bring in corporations and institutions and help that partnership and facilitate those conversations? Those are the things that we think about when we continue to build our technology.
And I just want to add that, I love the organizations, because we have to get better at it at our institution, who focus on the degree, competencies, and skills, because I think when you focus on the competencies and skills part, you can unbundle things, and then a learner can pick up wherever they're at. You can meet them where they're at and say, I can now assess, I'm missing these couple of competencies, and if I added these 2 skills, I go from that dead-end job to a job that's making a lot more money for me and my family, and a growth path. And I think that's what we want to offer the non-traditionals.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes left, and I want to get to this question about if we're here 10 years from now, talking about the student experience, how has it changed? What does higher ed look like a decade from now in terms of the student experience? And I will start, Tom, this time. Sorry, see, you got last time. So,
kept my mouth
and then we'll
shut.
come down here. We have 2 minutes, so 30 seconds each.
Yeah, my hope would be is that, one, that we've unbundled it so that there's a lot more optionality for our students our learners to consume in the way that they want to consume that works for them. Because we all come from different places, start, stop, and pick up. So I hope that we have an unbundling movement that happens. And I hope that we get out some of the misgivings, like the 40 million, that we haven't, those that we've kind of locked out of the system, and close some of the equity gaps that we've had. I just hope that we can sit here and say, 10 years ago, we had challenges that we could measure. There's measurable improvement around equity, access, and just optionality for opportunity.
Great. Sarah?
I do think we will be in a space where that hyper-personalization will be able to be supported. And I think that we will hopefully be able to democratize access. There's still, and one concern I have is the digital gap, right? And that it's going to just keep getting wider and wider. We are going to co-evolve with AI, with our different technology. We're going through an incredible growth in that, and it's going to be really important for us to make sure that we are, as a society, doing what we're supposed to be doing as educators. So we need to come back to what it means to be human in all of this as well.
Raj?
To me, 10 years from now, with all the technology that is available, especially with AI, I think personalization plus scale is going to happen. Second, it is a cultural shift. It's a mindset shift that we need to have. And at the end of the day, one of the things we need to focus on is the structure. far too often, when you don't have the right structure, we have learned it from for-profit corporate companies, student experiences or the importance of student experiences don't diffuse. So we need to pay attention to the structure, if you will. And last but not the least, listen to the needs of the learners, and more importantly, do not act with business as usual and disrupt conventional wisdom.
Yeah, so agree with everything, and I think definitely more focus on learners versus students. I think we'll make progress on access. Technology will play a much bigger role, and I think it will require a different type of partnership between technology and institutions to actually solve the problems.
The partnership, I think, is important. Please join me in thanking Tom, Raj, Sarah, and Talin, and thank you for being here today. Thank you.